Hi, everybody. Welcome to our February Homeless Solutions Advisory Council. Martin, I don't see Jess. Is she here? Just making sure.
Not
Okay.
yet.
It's going to feel a little rushed first thing here because we're going to get through a couple things and then get to the meat of this agenda. And then we do have a presentation at 3:00 from Lauren with the Office of Community Development. Happy February. Hope everybody's doing well. Next slide. So we're going to do some updates. Staff are going to do some updates. We are going to ask that any committee members that are present, if you could send your updates via email, we would appreciate that. Again, it's just a time saving right now. Dive into our financial planning and then our presentation. Yelling at you. Just a reminder, public comment is always welcome. You can join us online or in person here. Raise your hand if you're on Zoom. There is a public comment form made available through the website, and that goes directly to staff, and they will always get back to folks. Do we have any public comment today?
Nothing via the form. I don't see any via Zoom and didn't see any in the room.
Great.
I think about actually, Chair, I believe we might have had one submitted directly to Nadia. Nadia, forget if we were reading that one or addressing that one.
The person didn't actually send a comment, so yeah, someone reached out saying that they wanted to comment, but yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Think we're gonna
Jess on.
Katie will start, and then as soon as Jess gets here, we'll pivot to her.
Okay.
Next slide. Sorry.
Nadia, next slide.
If you haven't seen, there is a major article in the Oregonian about 2.5 weeks ago that highlighted the work that we are doing in SHS, and it was a huge win for us. Folks coming together to share this story. They interviewed Ashley and her daughter Amanda and her daughter Ashley, Ashley and her daughter Amanda, Ashley and Amanda.
Ashley Garrison.
Her daughter's name I think is Amanda.
Yeah.
And it did a really good job of telling the ups and downs of SHS. And Molly, maybe I'll call you in. I think you did a really good job recapping the work of this at our staff meeting last week. If you want to share kind of the highlights of that article.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I think it really felt like a balanced and complex story. So it was showing different perspectives going into what people felt like was promised when we passed the supportive housing services measure, and then what has actually happened on the ground. And I think it just shows this is where we're at 5 years in. We are literally making life-changing investments in keeping people in permanent housing. You can even see the pie charts of the different counties and their investment strategies. And I think just some key takeaways, at least for us, is obviously I think it elevated the level setting and how do we manage expectations of what does it mean to so-called end the homelessness crisis when we are literally still building out our full system of care, and at the same time we have moved thousands of people in permanent housing at the same time. So we already have people who are we delivered a program that was assumed that we were going to get renewal because we put people in permanent housing. So telling this story is crucial, and it's nuanced. And I think the other kind of key takeaways is you solve someone's homelessness and they're no longer visible. And that in itself creates its own kind of weird cognitive dissonance in the public sphere. So how do we keep telling? That's really important, that we keep telling the lives of people's stories in a way that makes people like these are real people, if not for this measure, we're not sure what would happen. So I think it's just the other point we're trying to make is our homeless service. We're not going to solve. We're going to be we're an emergency room often, or we're not like the social safety net of all the healthcare issues. So it's just being really clear of what interventions we are able to do, and we just need to keep telling the story of all these people's lives are being changed to kind of help change the narrative that some people may think that we're not seeing as much progress as we have done. And I like to say, we're 5 years in and we're just getting going in our built infrastructure, and yet we've still made a big difference in thousands of people's lives. So I just want to thank everyone who was interviewed and participated in this complex story. And Lillian, the reporter, is on it, and it's going to continue telling that story. So that's good news too.
Thank you, Molly. Before I pass it over to staff for bylaws and recruitment, I do need to share with the Solutions Council that Jim, our friend Jim Bain, needed to step away from Solutions Council. He apologizes for not being able to be here in person to share that announcement. But that does mean we have some recruitment we're going to be doing. So Nadia or Emily?
Nadia, take it away.
Hey all. I apologize I'm not there in person. I'm a little bit under the weather. I just wanted to give a quick update about bylaws. We are postponing sending bylaws to the board in order to just kind of align better with HAC and give a little more time for review. So as such, we're also delaying the change with co-chair. So we'll do the co-chair election probably a little bit further into the year. We will begin, and we have begun, recruitment in the sense that we're receiving applications. It's been posted with the county announcements of open positions. This news about Jim's position is very new, so that one might be a little bit delayed again, but we will plan to kind of have this all in order towards April, I think. And if there are changes, I will let you know.
Thanks, Nadia. And I'll just add that Jim's position was a general one, so there's a lot of flexibility there. If you know someone who you think would be a good fit, please pass them our way. We were thinking about this recruitment in terms of like a business chamber seat. So this is a different vacancy for us and a really great opportunity to bring someone new into the fold. Just really quick, I want to touch on, we have some shelter engagement underway. You might see it in other places. I know some of you in this room or online are connected to either the Aloha area or around Cornell Road and Cedar Mills. If you think of any stakeholders that would be interesting to talk to about the Central County Safe Rest Village, which is going in Aloha, right on the border of Reed's Crossing in Hillsborough, or Cornell Road Recovery, which is going to be located outside of the Oak Hills HOA in Cedar Mills, please send those contacts to me. Our next meeting is for the Central County Safe Rest Village. It's virtual, February 25th. Feel free to tune in, and if you know a neighbor who might have some encouraging feedback, we would love to see that. And I'll pass this off to Jess now, who has a kind of an exciting ask for the Solutions Council.
Thank you, Emily and team. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I have a frog in my throat that's growing into more than a frog. So I had to kind of surprisingly leave the meeting and come upstairs and quarantine myself in my office. So apologies for the scramble for those of you in the room, and thanks for everyone's patience and adjustment here. We are in the midst of what used to affectionately be called earmark season, but it's congressionally, congressional appointments of congressional direction of appropriations. And so jurisdictions often compile their most competitive and exciting projects and try to secure federal funding through our congressional representation. And in Washington County, we've had great success in our partner jurisdictions. Beaverton secured funding for their shelter, and I believe they're working on additional funding for their senior affordable housing project. And you all know that the Hillsborough shelter also has congressionally directed funding. So we appreciate our city partners for being so successful with that strategy with their government relations team. And we're catching up here in Washington County. And so we've been able to get two of our projects owned by the housing department on the list of about 5 that are being considered to be put forward by the county. And as one of the parts of that work, we assemble letters of support. And staff had the idea that perhaps our Solutions Council would like to lend your name and support so that we can hopefully be more competitive in this opportunity to secure federal funding. The 2 projects that are being put forward are in various stages of reality, if you will. One is moving along quite confidently and robustly. That is the PSH in Forest Grove project is owned by the Housing Authority. They recently acquired the land officially this winter and are working with Central Cultural as a resident services provider. And we also have secured funding from Care Oregon. So we're hoping to do PSH with a behavioral health focused. This building won't open until probably January of 2028. But we're really just assembling funding so that we can create even more units through funding opportunities like this through the federal government. So that's one project, and I'm going to put it in the chat for you all so you can reference. And then the other is one we haven't really been talking about, and it's probably a longer horizon. Here comes the PSH Forest Grove link. It's just a website describing the project. The other is our bridge shelter, which you all know very well. It's in Hillsborough, and it was a project turnkey project purchased, I believe, back in 2021. And it's in operations today as a bridge shelter, hosting 60 folks or households in shelter and sometimes medical respite services. But the building was never meant to last long. It's already last longer than we expected. And so it's time for us to start gearing up the fundraising strategy to replace the building because we need those units in continuous operation to serve our community. So getting to my point at hand, and I know Kim, our chair, would like me to be timely here. These asks are going forward through our government relations team, and it's just our department's team to assemble letters of support. And so I just wanted to put it before the committee today. If you would be interested in having your co-chairs sign on to a letter of support for each of these projects so we can be more competitive in the opportunity to secure federal fundings for them. It's a long shot, but we thought you all might be interested in helping to bring more funding to Washington County by way of our federal resources. So I'll leave it at that. And Kim, if you want to follow up with any kind of additional thoughts or next steps, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Jess. Drew and I had an opportunity to talk, and we talked a little bit with Jess, and we are in full support of supporting the team and having these letters of support go out for these 2 initiatives to get this federal funding here in the county. We want to be able to do these projects. We want to continue to increase our beds and make sure we have safe shelters and all that stuff. So I'm going to give it back to all of you if there's any more questions about this, or if we are ready to move forward in support of these letters of support.
I'm in full support. Jess, would you want us to look at HealthShare potentially doing a letter of support as well alongside the Solutions Council?
Wow, what an offer. Absolutely.
Okay,
We've already put out an ask to Care Oregon because of their partnership with the PSH project. But Adam, I will absolutely take your offer up offline, and we can work on however you need to route that through your department.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so we're gonna do them separately for our voting purposes here at Solution Council. So we have a motion to endorse these recommendations. For letter of support, just kidding, we're doing them together. Zoe, I see your hand.
I'm just voting that I'm supporting.
Thank you. So I do need a motion. So Zoe. Will you
Motion
say
to
the
move.
words?
Yes.
Perfect.
I'll second.
Thank you, Christina. All in favor, raise your hand in some form.
See, I was gonna say aye, but I'll find my hand. There we go.
No, you're good. I got it. Any opposed? Any abstained? Not seeing anything? Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your help on that. Jess, I will get this verification to Martin and you guys are ready to go. We are going to skip through our slide about committee updates like we talked about at the beginning. We're going to get those via email if you have something to share. And then I am going to give it right back to Jess and Katie for financial planning, which we started last meeting and we're continuing today.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, we don't need much more of an introduction because this is really part 2 of what we started last time. This time we're going to have Erin go more briefly over the financial documents because that should just be a quick review, if a refresher from what we discussed last month. The substance hasn't really changed. We caught some errors and updated some details, but really the substance is mostly the same. Then we've invited Heather in. She's joining us online and she will walk through some of those data points, same as the data points we shared last time. But as you recall, we didn't spend much time in discussion. We ran out of time. So we'd like to spend more time there talking to you about how we look at our system and its effectiveness in its operations as measured through these data points that consider throughput in our system. So we'll spend a little more time there. But then the substance of the discussion, which I know your co-chairs really want us to get to, especially since we're managing for a tight agenda today, is Katie's portion of the conversation. And she will go through each section of our system, the front door system, shelters and outreach, the housing programs, the wraparound support programs. So she'll go through each one with some high level context and then ask you for feedback about what are considerations that will help inform budgeting this year and long into the future as we continue to refine our system through year-over-year operations and resources. So that's the kind of flow of the discussion today. If you can, I just really encourage us to move through some of the more data-focused elements when you're able to get your questions answered and get into that discussion so we can really hear from the committee members on your recommendations, your guidance to us in informing budget work underway. All right, with that, I'm going to take this froggy voice and go on mute and listen to your discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Great, so I'll just do a quick orientation. Erin Babby, Business Operations Analyst here in the Finance Division. So this first slide here is the balance of the system. And in each of these next slides, we're going to have a 25-26. That is the contracted amounts that we put into the system this year. 26-27 are the budgeted amounts that we have put forth and are in county review right now. And then we've started a forecasting process that we've added here. So looking at the long range of the system. This slide shows you programmatic groupings, obviously. We'll go to the next slide, which shows you similar programmatic groupings, but then the individual budget amounts by each area. And I'll just note that when I came here 2 years ago, I was told that this system was one that should be stabilizing. And if you look big picture, 25 to 26 to 27, you can see that in terms of how we're looking at the system and how we're going to be able to spend within the system, we are plateauing. We can go to the next slide. And then this is obviously the revenue forecast. So you folks know where the revenue comes from. These are the estimations and projections that we have at this time. And you can see it in this case, we're actually taking that forecasting another year. And then on our last slide of the finance section, you can see how that's really all summarized by those large programmatic groupings and balanced against revenues.
Okay, guys, any questions on those finance slides that have been presented to us? Aaron, thank you for being here.
Yep.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Can we go back to the first one? One more. Yeah, there. This what is in system operations and why is that admin essentially?
So will you switch to the next slide?
Which color?
So
That's quality assurance, community connect, city liaisons.
Yep.
Okay. I guess what I'm looking for is an extra $2 million. And
Right.
I'm just curious about that. What is this? What is city liaisons, by the way? Is that because we've given money to Beaverton, we need to know what's going on with that money, or?
It funds 3 positions, one for the city of Beaverton, one for the city of Hillsborough, one for East Washington County, so Sherwood, Tigard, and Tualatin.
Okay, and that's okay.
And that's for like partnerships with cities and coordination as we're addressing homelessness.
Rachel, can you say more when you're looking for 2 million?
Well, I mean, obviously we're short $2 million with the eviction prevention program in 27-28, and I'm not clear. Are we just hoping that we're going to get something from the state for that, and that's why it's blank right now because we don't have a commitment?
Thank you for that question. That's really helpful. The reason we've only committed 2 million out that far is for the exact reason you described.
Okay.
Because right now, eviction prevention is in our budget because the board we went to Metro to ask for one-time funding to fill the gap that the state made. And the funding was meant to fill that gap for the biennium. And we don't know what comes after that biennium. I don't think that anyone expects we will defund eviction prevention entirely, but I do think we all need to come together to figure out how that is a sustainable part of our system ongoing.
And then in terms of that, why our medical respite services, is that cost going up because we're adding beds?
Excellent questions. Thank you, everybody. Yes, that is why that number has gone up here, but that is another place where we're looking to our health partners because we think much, if not all of those costs could be taken on through our healthcare partners. These are not the shelter costs, they're just the costs of the medical coordination services. And we would like to see, we want to continue paying for the shelter costs in our medical respite program, but ask for the medical services to be paid for by a health system partner. And we're working on it in many different fronts.
That was my other question. So, but you can read my mind. So I'm just going to turn my audio off.
All right, well, shall we move into Heather's presentation, or are there other questions for Aaron about the financials? All right. Well, you can bring we have the slides ready to pull up as we go into discussion later, but let's transition to getting into our through flow data. Heather, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Just a quick introduction. My name is Heather Scriver. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the data and evaluation supervisor, so overseeing everything related to HMIS and data and reporting out of the system. And so with that, I'm here to talk a little bit about some of our system, like capacity, volumes, and throughput. So if we can move on to the next slide. First, we're going to talk about our system capacity and specifically focusing on our shelter programs. There's a little bit of a mismatch of data in this, so I'm going to describe what I'm describing here. So the first left side of that little stair step is kind of describing the progression through. So as of January 1st, 2026, we started this year off with 1,226 people waiting for a shelter in Washington County. To help those people, we have 505 units of shelter and transitional housing capacity. So when we say units, we mean households that we can serve. And those units, 505 units, served 2,173 people in fiscal year 24-25. So we're getting a lot of people coming through the system. We also have a lot of people waiting, is what this tells us. And then that next thing is kind of when people go to shelter, of that 2,173, we did have 875 people exit shelter to a permanent housing destination in fiscal year 24-25. Now, when I say permanent housing destination, that is based off of the exit destination that's recorded in HMIS. So it may not be a housing placement in one of our county managed rental assistance programs or homeless services programs, but it is something that has resolved that person's homelessness. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so similar look here about how our housing programs are operating. So we're going to again start with the waitlist. So as of January 1st, 2026, we had 1,770 households waiting on our Community Connect housing matching list. So they're waiting for a referral to a housing program. For the next bucket is kind of like the middle piece of in fiscal year 24-25, there were 755 households who had been sitting on our Community Connect waitlist who were referred to a housing program. And of those, 233 households had been housed by the end of the fiscal year 24-25. I'm going to flag for that one that is a point in time snapshot of those 755 households. The ones that weren't housed at the end of that period could get housed at a later period. It's just more like this is when we grabbed the data, that is how many people have been referred and enrolled in a housing program from our Community Connect waitlist. And then that third bucket is as of just how many total households we had housed across all of our housing programs. We had 2,846 households housed. So I think the large message from this is that we are getting a lot of people in housing. We have a lot of households who are in housing as a result of our great work. We also have a high need remaining with that 1,770 households still waiting for a referral. All right, and then for diversion, what we're going to flag here is we have 438 people that we estimate to be waiting for diversion. This is as of 1/1/2026. This is an estimate based off of the people who are getting flagged as at risk of homelessness on our coordinated entry wait list. And we see this as the population that is most the best fit for either eviction prevention or our housing resolution fund services. So that's what we think we have waiting. And then the next number there is that over fiscal year 24-25, we served 1,813 households with eviction prevention funds. Any questions on the data?
Excellent. Thank you, Heather. Okay, I think we have some questions, or is there more?
Well, is there questions about the data?
Oh.
We will jump into.
Yes, Christina, sorry.
Hey, I just have one, may be silly. You said 438 for waiting for diversion. What diversion? Define diversion.
Yeah, by diversion, we're meaning we're trying to divert them out of a housing program. So that's where we get into the problem solving conversations, or housing resolution fund, which we launched at January, which is really trying to figure out what are other solutions that we can get. Is it move-in costs and they get to move into housing and we resolve their issue, and therefore they're not sitting on our Community Connect wait list waiting for one of our bigger housing programs, or it could be eviction prevention to prevent them from becoming homeless, so that way they don't hit the need for a housing program enrollment.
Got it. Okay, just double checking because it has very different meanings in all the circles I run.
Yep.
And
Thank
Heather, if I may, a lot of these folks are often either like doubled up, not yet experiencing unsheltered homelessness if they're in this.
So they're not part of the 1770.
They will be part of this.
They will be.
They are part of the 1770.
Okay, so that's what you, okay.
But
okay.
they're not necessarily part of the like waiting for shelter necessarily.
Okay,
They could be part of the waiting
Okay.
for shelter too.
okay.
But
And then the 1226 people waiting for shelter. Can you define that? Are these people living on the streets that like don't even go into the overnight shelters, or?
Yeah, those are people who've completed a shelter referral assessment. And so that could be people who are currently unsheltered. It could be people that they have a known exit date from an institutional setting. So from if they're going to get released from jail and we know what their date is, or they're in another system of care and we have that date. Could also be people who anticipate that they're going to be losing housing soon and they're getting on that wait list proactively, so that way they can have something ready. So it's a pretty good mix of people in there, but it is not people who are currently enrolled in a shelter bed. It's people who are waiting for that first enrollment into shelter.
But Kim, to answer your question, some of them may be going to a walk-up bed that is available that day. They could be on the shelter wait list and also accessing a walk-up bed, but we have very limited walk-up beds in Washington County.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Rachel?
Sorry, I have a couple, so there's been a lot of like data on, at least in Multnomah County that I'm aware of, where they talk about how many folks who are in the shelter system end up transitioning to permanent housing. It's a pretty low number. It looks like, I was about to do the math, but it looks like I'm going to just say about 30% of, actually a little bit more than 30% of the folks who stayed in shelter over the 12 months actually exited to permanent housing. Am I correct there? Is that, or?
Yeah, I think it's like somewhere between 35 and 40%. I did the math and now I forgot what it is. I'm also trying to pull up our system performance measures, which has a slightly different time gap of it, but it's somewhere around there.
And is that why? So that's definitely a better statistic than, some other places. But I'm curious, like, why you attribute, like, is that because we have like such great shelter providers? Is it because we're providing additional resources from other parts of the chart, like long-term rent assistance? I'm just curious, like, if we have a sense of that chunk of folks, it looks like, and then some people are still in shelter, and then a lot of people aren't. Like, a lot of people end up do they just end up back on the street?
I'll just flag on kind of like how we group exit destinations. So what I included in that statistic is just those that are going to permanent housing. There are people who exit to what we would call temporary destinations. So that could be that they went to go stay temporarily with a friend or family that's considered temporary in nature. And so there are also people who exit to hospitals, they exit to mental health institutions or sober living or like any of those types of situations. And then there are people who still exit back to the street.
Rachel, one of the things that I think is helpful from a programmatic lens is we just did a pretty deep dive into shelter data and are going to continue to dive further into it as to kind of looking at the correlation between length of time in a shelter and what is the exit outcome of that? And then also what other supports are we providing? So we do have the Housing Resolution Fund, flexible funding through our shelter liaisons, those types of things that are really supportive of getting folks quickly moved into the next situation, especially if they have the ongoing ability to pay their rents. The other thing that we've been kind of diving into, and especially as our system is leveling off, is what percentage of folks, I think when we first started, there was a lot of folks exiting shelter into our housing programs, and that's no longer the case because we don't have that same churn through our housing programs. And so in the latest data that we pulled, there is a lot of people who are self-resolving their homelessness on an ongoing basis, and how are we supporting that? There is a lot of data there. Heather and her team have been working with Kisa and Justin in the programs team to really dive into it and figure out what are our takeaways, how can we link further. On a national level, 40% is kind of the benchmark goal as to where to get to for a permanent exit destination, which is right where we're at.
Go ahead, Jess.
I'll be fast because Katie just mainly said what I was going to get to, but I want to kind of help back up Heather. We put her under an unreasonable amount of time to pull together this data, and these are just high level throughput thoughts to help inform your budget discussion. But more fancy looking, deep dive data thoughts are coming your way as her team continues to refine our system performance metrics for HUD in the next couple weeks, months. So thank you for these good questions. This is just meant to be a taste of data until we get until we get that better data together for you all.
Drew, I saw your chat pop up and then disappear about imminent risk. Do you want to chat about that? We can't hear you. No, we can see your lips moving, but cannot hear what you're saying. But you are unmuted. But I guess I think maybe where you were going is imminent risk folks versus literally homeless. In our shelter, we are prioritizing literally homeless on the top of that shelter referral list. So something to know for folks, if you're experiencing unsheltered homelessness, those folks pop to the highest of our priority list to get folks into shelter over folks that are imminent risk, still have housing. I don't know, Drew, if that's where you were going.
He's taking.
Said we can move on.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for being here.
Well, I get to now jump into our fun part of discussion and really want to hear from you all. Quickly before we go into discussion, wanted to highlight some of if you'll go to the next slide, Nadia, the high level of the budget, a couple of big things that are different in the budget, and we are very close to this work, is a cost of living adjustment. So 2.7% cost of living adjustment to all of our contracts and day rates. So that is not only our FTE rate, but also our day rate adjustments. So that's where you'll see a slightly higher cost in 26-27 than in 25-26. A participant assistance increase specifically for our housing programs because of the shifting of the way that we're doing allocations, kind of meeting the needs and what we've seen come through this year, to really just kind of balance that out. It's not a huge adjustment, but really for our rapid rehousing and our housing case management, our permanent supportive housing projects, because of the move-in only line items and the participant assistance, reconciling those back together. And then lastly, an expansion of our housing liaison positions, really being responsive to the needs that we've heard, having the need to have somebody connected to Arlo only and really be able to use that and have kind of resources available in the system overarchingly, expanding that based off of a lot of the needs that we have heard over the past year.
So what does expansion look like? Just more?
One additional position.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That will target. It will be a liaison position, but assigned to all of the households who are in Arlo only. If they on kind of a more, not a case manager role, but really a liaison role, but having that availability so that Arlo only uptake is one of the things that we hear a lot around Arlo only is folks are hesitant to let go of that case manager, even though they may be stable and their case manager thinks they're stable. But the hesitation is around, I don't feel like I then have a person to call. So this will be an opportunity for them. Great. Next slide. Sorry, I was trying to read Rachel's comment. So I want to now open up a lot of discussion to you all. So kind of on our access side of the house, our total investment is $24.89 million, almost $25 million. That covers our access center, street outreach, our liaisons, and our shelter and transitional housing. I think really the purpose, we'll break this down by the different programs, but wanting to hear what program improvements can we make, and are we addressing our system throughput based on the data that we showed you? And how else should we be prioritizing investments? If you say we should double our shelter costs, then that means reducing our housing costs by $25 million. So do we have the right level of investment, and are there other system improvements that we can make so that that investment is stretching further, is kind of the goal of each of these different buckets. So we'll start here with this $25 million. Is this the right prioritization, and what are other process improvements that we could be making in these systems so that this dollar stretches further?
I think it's hard. It's hard because the money's not there. So all the dreams and the need, it's difficult to sometimes give you the answer you're looking for, Katie, in terms of direction. So I'm gonna have to switch a little bit here, you guys, because I am the executive director of a program of SHS or an agency. And like access centers aren't fully funded, which is a huge challenge for the agencies that have access centers. Street outreach, there's probably not a number that we could get to in terms of what we need for street outreach to meet the needs of all of those people we just identified, 1,226 people waiting for shelter. I don't fully understand the roles of housing and shelter liaisons. I still don't have a full grasp on that. So that was part of my, like, we're expanding this because I don't get it. I know that in our scenario, we have both of these positions. Our housing liaisons are based out of the CATS, and our shelter liaison is based out of our shelter. Our shelter liaison, as of today, has a caseload of 70 people because we have 74 people in shelter and only 4 people are connected to a case manager via housing. That's a huge caseload to try to navigate for one person, particularly in a shelter environment. And so it causes question marks about the roles and responsibilities of these folks, particularly when our vouchers are at a point where they're so low, which then completely contradicts what I just said, because I love the idea of a liaison for Arla only so that we can move people through the system better so that we have those openings. So there's a tension there for me. And then of course our shelter and transitional housing. One of the questions that we've kind of always asked, and for me, it's going to expand this list of services that you have there, is what is working? We see the numbers, we have the data points, but I can't tell you which programs are really working. I can tell you from on the ground for our agency, but is rapid rehousing really working? Are we utilizing that the right way? And is it a program that is PSH working? I still don't have those answers. So when I'm asked about improvements, I'm kind of left to go, I can tell you from the on the ground bias, but as a system, I don't know what's truly working for us or where our clogs are or what could be shifted, because I understand if I were to say, please increase access center funding, then I also have to give you what I'm willing to decrease.
I'm gonna maybe rudimentary simplify this, but you would say yes, increase access center funding here. Also want to focus though on what other program improvements or things that could help reduce program costs. Are there any in this?
Well, one of the exciting things that I know of that's coming is that as of yesterday, HealthShare's board approved a data sharing agreement with Washington County Homeless Services Department to be able to pair healthcare data and homeless information data. What that's done in Multnomah County, which we've been able to do, is to really highlight, like, these are folks who are utilizing high cost medical services and high cost, or who are entering homeless services or exiting homeless services. And we're starting to see like some trends in like who these folks are and really highlight like areas of just looking at where we could invest differently as both a health system and a homeless services system. That is, I'm excited to be able to do that with Washington County too, because I think that there's a lot that we can learn from that. And so it's not necessarily a like a suggestion right now of this is the thing we can do, but I would say to use that data sharing agreement to really look at the overlap between the where health, like high utilizers of healthcare services and the high, like where they're showing up in homeless services, and try to really create like a shared approach to what that work could be.
I mean, I'm gonna piggyback on that because Kim and I have been talking as well. Similarly, you know, in my mind, there's an easy stretch for us with street outreach. There's huge cost to it, but man, if we could have street outreach 24/7 so that our jails, healthcare systems, emergent first responders have a touch point of, oh yeah, we can get you an e-bed really easily in one of our shelters because we have 3 shelters throughout the county. But I recognize there's huge cost to that, but could there be, so we need to talk to him more. Could there be more benefits to this? And then the other thing I recognize, and I always want to state this, is not all of the ideas we have or how our homeless friends touch our community is SHS qualified. Like not everything, SHS can't pay for everything. And so looking at some of that. Okay, I saw Stacy and then Zoe.
Thanks. I was just sticking with what you said about the understanding who is using what kind of other services. And I was wondering if you go back to the data and the analysis, which population that's kind of waiting for services do you think would be most impacted by that? Because it doesn't seem like that's going to be as deep as a change kind of situation for those who are awaiting diversion. I'm just taking a guess compared to those who are awaiting shelter, but these are just guesses. So do you have anything from your Multnomah County experience that would help you say, no, here it's the 1700 is going to be really, you know, important and interesting, and this is going to really change, not so much change that number, but I think the biggest impact would be around this population compared to that one, because there's kind of 3 different doors that we've been describing or talking about, and there's, you know, they're definitely not distinct, but just trying to get a little bit more clarity on where you think that medical piece might free up some resources.
So far, the only county we've been able to do this with is Multnomah County, which has a very different system of care developed. But what we've been able to see is that 1/3 of all of like HealthShare's highest priority population that's utilizing the most medical spend is showing up in the HMIS system for Multnomah County, which means that now that's allowing HealthShare as the largest CCO in the area to really highlight these are areas where we know that where our highest need folks are showing up. And so it allows for a different distribution of resource from the health system to go to that population. So it's not necessarily like utilizing dollars or like utilizing homeless services dollars differently, but it's partnering with healthcare and homeless services to say, we know that's where like this is where folks are showing up. These are the systems they're engaging in. And what would be helpful for you to keep people in permanent supported housing at like, you know, if folks are not being successful at permanent supported housing at this level, what are the things that you would need to keep them housed? And so it's just allowing us to have these different levels of conversation because now we're able to see like, for example, people are with psychosis, opioid use disorder, and stimulant use disorder are exiting permanent supported housing at twice the rate of anyone else. That's not a surprise for anybody, but we know that then those are some areas that if we were to make those services more available to those in permanent supported housing, they might have a better chance at being successful. And it's just, these are the types of questions we're now able to answer because of the data. And we haven't made we've had this for about 6 months. So it's like, you can't make a whole system change in 6 months, just as you can't with 5 years, but it's starting to look at it differently and like more holistically and more partnership oriented than what we've previously had access to being able to do from a healthcare perspective.
And that's similarly to what we're trying to do too, because we started gathering data on our homeless population a year and a half ago after the El Monica project because of the fact that we're so data informed and we need to see the story of what's going on because our crews are just like the outreach workers, they're boots on the ground. What are they seeing? Where are the service gaps? You know, we're the safety net, so we're going to pick them up everywhere. But it's one of those things where we're constantly seeing these folks, you know, do the hospital back onto the streets, do the hospital back on the streets, you know, things like recuperative care services and medical respite services, which is a new terminology for me, but it's that kind of stuff that is so instrumental to us. And it's very costly when you have these people that aren't being taken care of from that standpoint, whether it's HealthShare or whether it's us or whatever. So, but we need to see that story, especially the boots on the ground piece of it to see what is going on. And that's why poor Heather got asked 5 million questions because we're all data junkies here.
And I will give Heather like a huge amount of props. She is already like months before the data agreement was even signed. She's been like doing the technical side of like, how do we actually do this? So huge props to Heather for working on the project already.
Hey, I just want to do a little time.
Sorry,
No, this is great. I would just recommend going to the next slide. It's the biggest component of our budget, and I think is if we're going to have to choose one to talk more about, it makes sense to me to talk.
I am going to say out loud that I begged for the time today, you guys. This is going to be a Solutions Council chair and co-chair follow-up conversation. This group is wise and thoughtful, and I always want to make sure we have the time for it. I don't love the constraints. So I am going to allow Zoe to at least make her comment. And then, yes, Emily, we can move to the next.
Oh, Zoe, you're muted.
Zoe, I can't hear you.
I was saying that my comment is probably tied to every other slide. If we are not moving people from shelter, we're not moving the system. And Kim mentioned that she have one staff for I don't know how many people.
70.
So we do a live phase 1 assessment at the beginning. Engagement is not a problem. We have a lot of people engaged already in the system, waiting for a shelter or in shelter. Let's not forget that people in shelter are still homeless. Being in shelter doesn't mean that they are, that it's solved. So if we're not curious when people are in shelter and connecting them to the health system and having somebody to do a little more investigation of what's going on, we don't want our friends to be comfortable, but also we need to be curious of how can we move. If we move, we open beds. If we open beds, we bring people outside, inside, and then moving the cycle. So the bottleneck is how can we support people that are in shelter? No one staff with 70. Are the housing liaisons maybe need to be more focused with the people that are already in our shelters? Are the city liaisons probably need to work in the shelters that are already in those cities? I mean, if we don't move that needle, nothing is going to move. That's how I see it. So where is the delay? Is the navigation capacity? Is the landlord supply? Is the documents bottleneck, people waiting? 70 for one, it's impossible. Sorry.
You are correct. And I think that we all feel it, and that's part of this discussion. So Katie, if you want to do the next slide.
Nani, can you move us to the next slide? So we spend $73 million rapid permanent scattered site, permanent supportive housing, site-based permanent supportive housing, and our only program. This is both rent that goes out the door as well as supportive services. About $52 million of the 73 million is rents. About 20 million is supportive services attached to these. Thoughts, improvements, changes?
Can I ask, so clarify, at least for me, like right now, HCMS vouchers.
Yep.
We don't have any, it's full, we're not, what's the terminology there? Katie, how do I?
We pay for about just shy of 1,800 vouchers in the system, specifically for, actually, yep, 1784. In housing case management and site-based permanent supportive housing. So that is supporting 1,784 households at any given time in housing. So that churn that is happening is consistently moving as we move people on, getting people stable. As people lose housing, they may not be coming in, they may be doing family reunification, all of those things. We are not actively adding additional vouchers to the system every single year right now.
Okay. And same for rapid rehousing?
Rapid rehousing has 540 vouchers in the system. That is, 540 vouchers. But that is a much faster turn on that because it is a time limited program. So we are consistently moving households out of that program and adding new households. This is a space where I would like to continuously see program improvements. A lot of folks are in that program for a solid 2 years. That's not standard across nationally. A lot of folks are in that program a much shorter amount of time. And so you see more openings happen at a much faster clip because folks move through that program faster.
Are we seeing positive exits from rapid rehousing, or are we seeing rapid rehousing turn into long-term case management, HCMS?
Heather, do you happen to know what our returns to homelessness on or our positive exit from rapid is right now? It's okay if you don't. I think it's about 80% positive exit.
Positive exit being they're stable, they can sustain their rent,
or they're moving on to like an Arlo only situation or an affordable housing situation, whether it's an affordable housing unit on the rent, it's reunification with family. I want to say it's sitting right around 80.
Okay.
Maybe don't quote me.
I think it all.
I mean,
Hey, you guys,
looking at our most recent scorecard, the percentage of households exited to permanent housing for rapid rehousing programs in the county is, I mean, it's just all across the board. It's anywhere from close to between 80 and 100, all the way down to 20% of them exiting to permanent housing. So I think the system at large is well over that 60% goal, but there are certainly programs, that are under that.
Thanks, Drew.
Jess, did you unmute?
It's okay, Kim. I see we're at time, so I want to just make as much time for the committee.
We were given the gift of time by our friends Shannon and Lauren, so we have a few more minutes if you have context.
They just need 15 minutes for their vote, so we can go till 3:15 on this topic.
Okay, well, maybe this is a nice opportunity then to move on and finish the 2 slides that Katie still has. And I'll just offer to you all, I think you're doing exactly what we'd hoped to have happen, which is the strategic thinking about how our system is working and how we can help it to work better. The structure we've created might not be the most helpful way for you to have that conversation. So, if it's not helpful to think in the context of prevention programs versus housing programs versus safety off the street programs, we don't need to manage that. But I do just hope that what we're taking away here is we're in the work now of sustaining a system we've built with the same amount of resources effectively to sustain it. And so the only way we better respond to the need that still is at our doorstep is to figure out how to make our programs work more efficiently or to leverage other dollars. So keep on struggling with us here as you are, because that is the guts of the conversation, and you're in it.
I'm going to move us to prevention. So for the 26-27 fiscal year, $4.7 million for the Housing Resolution Fund, which is homeless prevention and move-in only, as well as funding for eviction prevention. Rachel, I saw your comment in the chat. The prevention that's needed has to happen in other systems of care, not just in ours. But other program improvements, places we could reduce costs, places we can lean into those other systems. Any thoughts, feelings, feedback? Ask the state for more money, advocate harder.
100%.
I mean, there's also been a lot of conversation about, and that we haven't really had here, but has happened at other tables, where we talk about who's actually coming into the system that we choose to serve. Like, we choose to serve some people and we choose not to serve other people, because we have this, partly it's this population A and B thing, and it's partly a choice about where we get our referrals and stuff. And that another way to increase the number of people we serve is to serve some people who have less of an acuity and need fewer resources. And that would actually change the game in terms of numbers as well. And I just want to remind us that that's a choice we're making. It's not necessarily, in terms of how the system is set up right now.
Can you, Housing Resolution Fund, because that's new. There's a couple components to it. Can you just remind us?
Two components specifically captured in this budget have move-in only. So these are going to be folks that just need that first month or security deposit paid for, and then they're able to sustain their rent on their own.
Are those services also available through housing liaisons?
Yep. Housing liaisons, street outreach, shelter liaisons all have access to move-in only.
I'm gonna ask it differently. Those services, there's funding dedicated to housing liaisons for just those things. So this is a duplicate pot for similar services, is what I'm trying to get to.
Yes, we would encourage liaisons and street outreach and all of those things. They have a very limited budget, so they should be paying like application fees, those small, quick, and then that big chunk of cost, that $4,000 check that can go to a landlord to submit it through the Housing Resolution Fund, and it gets cut.
Okay, and then the other one?
Homeless prevention is the other funding here. This is targeted prevention to people who are on the verge of experiencing homelessness, paired in with case management. So liaisons are developing a plan in partnership with their participant to get them stable in housing. And part of that conversation is also, what is the ongoing sustainability? So we've had already 15 submitted and approved. We've cut almost $40,000 out of this just in January alone. For this year, we've had a lot of really good success stories about how folks are leveraging HRSN funding, how folks are, they had to miss work because they had a sick kid and that's why they were behind on rent. But how they also have a plan to get back and be able to sustain their rent long term, which is really the big piece of that homeless prevention funding.
Drew, we see your comment. I do think it would be helpful for us to have system-wide exit to permanent housing numbers for these programs when we have this conversation again. They're one of the ways we're measuring success, so they'd be helpful to have. Thank you for that.
Any other thoughts, questions, feelings, reactions to prevention? I'm going to move us forward to our last one. Next slide, Nadia. Support services. So these are the other systems of care that are still interacting with our participants. So workforce development, furniture services. Are these helpful? What other program improvements can be made? How should we be addressing investments in these two contracts?
I think sorry, I don't know.
You're
where
fine.
My hand is. I think we need I at least need more information what for workforce development is, what are the outcomes, what are the outputs, how successful it is, how people are accessing jobs or trainings or technical stuff. Like I don't know anything about workforce development. I know furniture service, but to give opinion.
I am probably not going to do a good job in 60 seconds or less describing all of the work of workforce development, but it is a partnership between Work Systems and ERCO that really brings people along the workforce training. They help with resume interviews, getting people connected to jobs. This is one we're looking to make improvements with that contract of specifically the metrics and performance outcomes for the 26-27 year within that contract, and focusing on what are the like tangible jobs. It's right now both jobs and also work training. And so this contract has taken a lot of different turns over the last 3 years, but really focusing a lot on how do we get people into employment quickly is a key goal. Zoe, also happy to share around ERCO came and presented at MISCO, our management and supervisor office hours for housing. In January, happy to share out those slides or have it come to a future meeting as well.
So is this a conversation that we're gonna continue to have like next month? We're gonna keep going with this? I mean, one of my questions, and I'm probably being something here, what are our key goals of SHS? Like, what are we really trying to do? I know what the measure says, and I know that housing is high priority. And then I see us trying to do a really good job of looking at the entire continuum and inserting places like workforce development or furniture services because those are so helpful. And also, are those highest priority of SHS? And I would even go back to the last slide, which this might be controversial, is the Housing Resolution Fund and is pre-eviction prevention the responsibility of SHS? And I know that's a hard one, you guys, I feel it. Or is that where we need to step in and advocate for those state funds and, and all those other things? Because between those two, we're looking at $6 million that could be then put into programs that are working and are successful and get those to the space where we're not just doing the bare minimum. We don't have a 1 to 70 caseload for a shelter liaison or our caseloads for case managers could be discussed. I don't know the answer, but it is what I'm thinking as we're talking about how do we want to do our system as we're at this middle stage trying to move forward. Yes, Jess, sorry.
I'm seeing we're at time and I want to make sure everybody has a chance to contribute. And just to clarify, this is not just our SHS work. This is our whole continuum of homeless services.
Thank you. Yep,
From federal funding from OHCS and SHS, which does include 25% for population B, and that's 25% of resources. So you serve many more households in population B on the per number because the dollar goes further generally. So anyway, Kim, quickly, so that we can get back and hear from others. This is the whole system we're thinking about and not just SHS and not just chronic homelessness.
Yeah, that's helpful. I went back to Erin's slide. That makes sense. Thank you, Jess.
Do we need to vote to approve this as a committee?
No, but you have another vote after this.
Oh.
I'm gonna move to our last slide. If we could go 2 slides forward, Nadia. The last is system infrastructure. So this is training, community connect, HMIS, quality assurance, city liaisons, and our risk mitigation program. It's $3.9 million. This is really kind of the things that don't directly support a participant, but support the system as an infrastructure whole. So
does that include the new HMIS and like the rollout and what that's gonna actually cost to make that happen?
that is not that is some 26-27 and some 27-28 budget. The actual rollover is not included in this. Our ongoing system costs are because that is a one-time funding situation to do the conversion. However, training is a huge piece of that and it's a lot of work and that will be
rolling out an entire new program plus training people to do it. I can imagine that's way more than $3.9 million and what that would, or I think that's going to be a big cost to a system.
Katie, is this also where some sort of like landlord liaison program would live?
Yes, we do it in-house with admin, but yes, that's where the risk mitigation program comes in and where we attribute staff costs to do landlord liaison work at the metro level, regional level.
Okay.
Okay. That was a heavy sigh in the room at least. So I am going to say, our doors are always open. You all can call us, you can reach out to us. These are ongoing conversations. This is not a one and done. So thank you. Know that this is ongoing conversations. Budget is our lives all the time, but we recognize it's not your lives all the time. But no, you can always reach out to us if you have thoughts, feedback, send us a note. You know how to reach us. So that I'm going to turn it back over to him.
Thank you, staff. Really appreciate that. And we'll just continue this conversation. We would like to welcome Lauren and Shannon from the Office of Community Development. Welcome to Solutions Council.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. For those of you who I've not met before, I'm Lauren Kalo. I am with the Washington County Office of Community Development. And then I'm going to let Shannon go ahead and introduce herself before I get going.
Yeah, thank you. And hi, everyone. I'm Shannon Wilson and lead our Office of Community Development. And just know you had a very full agenda and really full discussion too. And so just really appreciate your time today. So this is a requirement of our the Emergency Solution Grants Fund, so we administer. And so that's why we're here before you today. And so just really appreciate the time. And Lauren's really going to walk you through this. So I'm just here to enjoy her presentation. So thank you.
So you all should have received a memo regarding additional information. It kind of gave some background of the Emergency Solutions Grant and essentially laid out the requirement that we consult with members of the COC for the area. And so for those of you that have been on the council for a while now, you may have remember us coming to you in prior years. But I just want to also remind you, this is a conversation specifically about the Emergency Solutions Grant funding that's coming to Washington County. So it's completely separate from the previous conversation that you all had with the massive amounts of dollars. This is a very small award that comes to Washington County. So it's estimated around $152,000. And Community Action Organization receives these funds from our office through the current consolidated plan cycle. And so it's important for us to, bring this conversation to you as you were already discussing. You want to look at what's working, what's not working, and how this money fits within the overall, system and all the other funding that's going on in the area. So next slide, please. And so under the ESG program, there's 4 eligible activities. There's street outreach, emergency shelter, homeless prevention, and rapid rehousing. We are currently funding community action with ESG funding for rapid rehousing activities. And so this is specifically for populations category 1, literally homeless, and category 4, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. And so they provide short to medium term rent for these households, so they get them into housing. And then I think typically, Zoe, you serve households for about 2 years. And then housing, relocation, stabilization, case management, all of that is a requirement of the program. And so they receive ongoing case management throughout their time as an ESG recipient. And so that's what we're currently funding. We wanted to just bring this to you to consider the other activities, but also we did have a recommendation from Community Action to continue serving households with rapid rehousing activities. Can I have you go to the next slide? I'm not sure what's next. So our estimated allocation, as I said, is $152,000. Our office retains 7.5% of that for administrative costs. And so we're estimating around 41,000 to be awarded to community action for FY 26-27. And then the agency also provides a dollar for dollar match. So this project overall would be right around $300,000 going towards ESG rapid rehousing. Next slide, please. So again, the last 2 years, we've focused on rapid rehousing, and community action did suggest the continued use of ESG funds to be used for rapid rehousing. They said from a system perspective, they continue to view rapid rehousing as a critical and high need use of ESG funds in the county. Under the current contract, rapid rehousing is focused specifically on families, and it plays a key role in the family homelessness response. And so I think from here, I just want to open it up for discussion. And Zoe, if you have something to add, since you're currently receiving the funds and running that program, go ahead and say if you have any other input. Otherwise, we're open to other suggestions or comments.
Yes, we're doing match through coordinated entry, so it's equitable for everybody who has a phase 1 assessment. We're matching with shelter families across Washington County, and I didn't run a report, but I will say most likely 90% of exit, it's positive as well. We have ASU for a long time, and we match with state funding, dollar for dollar match, as well. So we use our state funding to do the case management. Questions?
And so basically what our ask is of you is we do need a vote to include rapid rehousing activities under the ESG program in our annual action plan that goes out for public comment in, I think in about 2.5, 3 weeks. In the memo, we also included performance indicators, performance objectives, and performance standards that we would also want. It would be part of the approval, the vote to approve.
Thank you, Lauren. Any questions from the group for Lauren? Zoe, did you just say you didn't pull a report, so you don't have numbers of how many served in the program?
We do have numbers, right, Lauren? We serve like 18 households.
For this next fiscal year, they're estimating 18 households. It really depends on the length of stay, right? So they're eligible up to the 2 years, but they do have to be re-certified after the first year to make sure that they're still eligible, income eligible. And then obviously there's other circumstances where households might leave the area, but they're estimating 18 households.
No, I didn't put the data of previous years' exits, like Heather was saying, exit to subsidized housing, exit to other permanent housing, Section A, rent on their own, or move to family members. 100% nobody have moved to homelessness. That I know.
Great. Have these funds always been used for rapid rehousing, or were they used for other things previously?
The last 2 years were rapid rehousing, and then the 2 years prior to that were homeless prevention. I'm trying to remember exactly what the kind of the barriers were to that, but from what I recall is, so with ESG, it's really, there's a lot of very specific components to it. So there has to be an inspection of the unit prior to any ESG funds being used. And so if somebody's already in a unit and it doesn't meet the housing inspection requirements, then ESG funds cannot be used to keep that household in their home. And so I think that was one big barrier. And then in other years, I think when we had COVID funding, we had a little bit go towards street outreach and emergency shelter. But between those two categories, you can only have up to 60% used for that. So then you would need to be looking at splitting the funding across several eligible uses.
And it's very document heavy as well. And you have to recertify every 3 months the households.
Yes,
and not everybody is eligible. Hink, hink.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, any further questions? If not, I am going to, did you have one?
No, I was gonna move to approve.
I gotta read it first.
Oh, sorry.
But you're gonna be first, right? You're gonna take this. Okay, so the motion to recommend endorsement of the allocation amounts for the emergency shelter grant activities as further described in attachment A, program year 2026, funding amounts for ESG eligible activities and approve the proposed performance standards as described in attachment B. So if you want to make that motion, you have to say all that. I'm kidding. Oh, Christine, I see your hand.
No, sorry, I was just getting ready to vote.
Right.
Sorry.
Adam, leave them.
All right, I will motion to approve
What we just said.
what you said.
Perfect. Can I get a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, please raise your hand in some capacity. Any opposed? Any abstained? Perfect. Thank you, Office of Community Development, for being here. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, that is, we're even gonna end just a tiny bit.
We have 5 minutes.
Right? Does anybody have anything for the good of the order that they would like to share before we adjourn? Yes.
So for McNewinto, I will send out the updates via email later, but just want y'all to be on the lookout for updates. Senate Bill 1667 / House Bill 6403. It's a bipartisan bill going through Congress right now. It's partially co-sponsored by Oregon Rep. Janelle Bynum. Basically, the meat of it is that if it passes, HUD will follow other federal program definitions of homelessness, including McKinney-Vento, most importantly. And so that expands the availability of those programs to people that are also, for example, doubled up or staying in hotels or in substandard situations. And so just, I'll put further information in the email. But yeah, slightly positive news.
Perfect. Thank you for that. We will take any positive news we can get. And on that note, big conversations today, you guys. I know it's tough. The work is hard. We've had a particularly hard week at Project Homeless Connect. And so thank you for how you show up and all that you do in this work. I have one of my 2026 goals was to buy lottery tickets every week. And I guarantee you that if I win, SHS is going to be the recipient of a whole bunch of money, so that our conversations can really expand.
Damn, friend, you're my friend.
So thank you, everyone. Jess, we hope you feel better quickly, and we will see everybody next month.